Hello and welcome to the first in a series of screencasts that we're going to be using to cover some content in Unit 5. Unit 5 is going to cover political parties, the legislative branch, which is Congress, and the executive branch, which is the presidency, and everybody else in the executive branch. The topic for this screencast is Introduction Notes. What are political parties? The directions for this screencast are at the bottom of your screen, so as you listen and watch the video lecture, you're going to complete the guided notes, which look like this. These are the guided notes that you're going to be using along with this screencast in order to learn more about what political parties actually are. As we get started, you'll notice that you'll need to fill in the guided notes in order to understand more fully what political parties are. So let's get started with the first question: what is a political party? A political party is a group of voters that have similarities among themselves with their ideas and beliefs, and they want to influence government, and they want to control the decisions of government. They do that specifically by getting their candidates elected to office. The electorate is a group of voters, so on your guided note sheet, you'll need to write that information down. And of course, at any point, if the screencast is going too fast for you to write down the information, please pause Ms. Drake. She doesn't mind. Moving on to the next terms, the party agenda, platform, and planks. So the agenda is a list of subjects that are important public issues, and those are important to all citizens. For example, national security, education, health care, taxes. All of those things are part of agendas for most political parties. How each party will address those issues are going to be determined by the party platform. And with the platform, how a party specifically will address those issues are called planks. So at the bottom of your screen, I have an example of how you can look at a Republican agenda, platform, and party. So the agenda is national security. That's actually an issue that's important to just about everybody in America. The Republican Party platform might be to help secure democracy in Iraq. So how are they going to go about doing that? That's your plank. Perhaps they're going to increase troops in Iraq by 20,000. So now let's take a look at functions of political parties. With the functions of political parties, all I'm asking you to do is to make sure that you fully write numbers 1 and 7. So let's take a look at these 7 functions of political parties. In other words, what do political parties do exactly? The top one in red is the most important, of course, because in order to achieve that description of a political party to influence and control government, they have to get their candidates elected to office. That should be obvious. They do other things as well. 2 through 6 talks about how they gather people together with similar ideas and values into a movement. In order to get things done in government, the more people you have on board, obviously the better. That's how you get a majority vote. They also govern in a very predictable way. For example, if you elect a president to office that's a Democrat, you could expect that person to really support big federal government ideas like Obamacare with Barack Obama. And obviously, if you elect a Republican president, you can generally expect that person to support the military, like President Trump. Number 4, parties exist to inform citizens on issues. So in order to learn more about the issues that form the agendas, platforms, and planks of parties, where are some reliable places you could go? One of the most reliable places that you could go in order to find out information about a political party is directly to their website. So this is the Republican Party's website, and you can find that here if you want to go and just kind of search around. It's the GOP.com. Now, just a little bit of FYI about the GOP. GOP stands for Grand Old Party, and that actually showed up in a newspaper article in the kind of the 1880s, and it's a name that kind of stuck because it stands for Grand Old Party. And so it was shortened to just the acronym GOP. And so even now, oftentimes the Republican Party is referred to as the GOP party as well. So here on the GOP website, you'll notice that it's got a lot of helpful places for you to go to figure out what they believe in with their platform. You could, for example, add your name to stand against the ridiculous cries for impeachment. You could go to the Action Center. When you go to the Action Center, you could figure out how in the world could you help build the political party. You could go to the menu where you're looking at the platform here for the political party, for the GOP, and what they believe. You could download the entire PDF and get your information directly from the source instead of, say, I don't know, Facebook. You could also go to the Democrats.org website. You'll notice that's up here at the top in the screen, and you could figure out who the Democrats are and what they're looking to do. You could also, of course, find out about history of the Democrat Party, the leadership. I didn't even know this, but the entire Democrat Party is under the leadership of this guy, Tom Perez. You can look at state parties. North Carolina has their own state Democrat and state Republican Party. You can look at where we stand. Of course, that's going to tell you about their, oh, look, party platform. So that way, again, you can get the information directly from the Democrats instead of getting it from someone on Twitter or TikTok or Facebook. You could even volunteer at your local Democrat or Republican headquarters in Cabarrus County. I had a student one year to do their personal project for IB by volunteering at the Democrat headquarters. If you would like to go to the North Carolina Republican Party platform website, it's here at the nc.gop. And you can, of course, look through any of these tabs up at the top to figure out more about the North Carolina Republican Party. And, of course, talk about the Republican National Convention that's happening in Charlotte in 2020. You can volunteer. You could get involved. That's what we want you to do, is to get involved in some way, shape, or form, whether it be Republicans, Democrats, or any other third party. Even if you're unaffiliated, you could absolutely still get involved in voter registration drives, for example. If you're wanting to look at the North Carolina Democrat Party, you can go to the NCDP, and this is where you can volunteer, you can take action, you can find ways to get involved, even without having to send your email address. So there are lots of information on these particular websites. There's even a Young Democrats of Cabarrus County organization that gets involved in schools. And so here at Concord High School, I know that there have been meetings for Young Democrats and also for the Teen Republicans. So again, you could go on Facebook. I'm sure they also have a Twitter page for the Cabarrus County Young Republicans, so you can get involved even here at school with the Teen Democrats or the Young Republicans. Of course, the main thing to do is to get involved and be informed on the issues. Next, number 5, manage government by filling government positions, means that political parties want to fill their positions in government that are not elected. So appointments to office, for example, like the president's cabinet. They also want to link together the different levels of government, which would help strengthen, again, number 1, getting their candidates elected to office, or even filling government positions with their candidates. At the national, state, and local level, they all work together during elections to make sure that all the Democrats or all the Republicans are going to get elected to as many offices as possible, so again, that they can control government decision-making. Last, number 7, this one I'd like for you to add specifically to your notes, is to act as a watchdog. A watchdog party is the party that is out of power, the party that lost the election, and they are guarding, just like a watchdog, government. So, for example, in the presidency, President Trump is a Republican, so the watchdog party is the Democrat Party for the presidency, and they're going to watch for any mistakes that the president is going to make, and they're going to point that out to the American people and remind the American people that in the next election they might want to vote Democrat. And that way they could go back to number 1 and get their candidates elected to office. So next, let's talk about party systems. There are 3 different types of party systems. The first 2 are on your screen. There's a one-party system, a multi-party system, and the third one is a 2-party system. A one-party system is pretty much the easiest to understand, because a country would only have one political party that's in control of everything, like China and the Communist Party. Strangely, they do have elections, but there's only one political party that's running, and that's going to be the Communist Party. So one advantage of that is that everyone in government pretty much has the same ideas about how to run government. But of course, the disadvantage is that not all opinions are represented, and we oftentimes see a lot of protests because, of course, there's a lot of minority groups whose ideas are not represented in government. In a multi-party system, this is where things get a little complicated, like in Great Britain or Israel, but it's very interesting to see how a multi-party system operates. In a multi-party system, there's 3 or more major competing parties. But what happens during elections, because there's so many different competing political parties, that oftentimes no one party will win the majority vote, which makes it a democracy, because again, by definition, a democracy means majority vote. So if no one political party then wins the majority vote, how do they know who's in power? In multi-party systems, parties must form a coalition or a compromise on issues in order to form a majority of the vote. So now on your screen, I have an example of what a coalition might look like. So let's say there are 4 major political parties. The Labor Party wins 15% of the vote of an election, while the Conservative Party wins 35%, the Liberals win 35%, and the Independent Party wins 20% of the vote. So obviously no one wins a majority with 51% or more, so what do they have to do? These 4 parties are going to have to start to talk to form a coalition or a compromise. For example, the Conservative and Liberal parties, because they're going to be very different generally with their major ideas, are going to try to get the Labor Party and the Independent Party on board with them to build what's called a consensus or an agreement, also called a compromise, on their coalition platform. So the Liberals only would really have to get the Independents on board to have 55% of the vote, and then that's done. Why would the Independent Party want to join the Liberal Party? Well, the answer should be obvious. That's a good way for the Independent Party to get their candidates into office and for their voice and their platform to be heard in government and help with government decision making. So back to our note screen, a good thing about a multi-party system, it's kind of upside down from the one-party system. You've got a lot of opinions represented, and that's great. But the disadvantage is sometimes that takes a long time to enact a solution with forming a coalition, and it oftentimes can divide a country. An example, again, is like Great Britain or even Israel. But the United States is a two-party system. By definition, a two-party system says that power shifts between 2 dominant parties. In our nation's history, we've really only had 2 major political parties. And in the next screencast, we're going to take a look at the history of those political parties. Now, students often say, yes, but there are some other parties, like the Green Party, the Independent Party, the Libertarian Party, and those are called third parties. But they're minor parties, and they sometimes win an election, but generally not major elections. They've never won a presidency, and there's usually a couple of independents in Congress. Usually you find third parties more in state or local offices, but what happens is they oftentimes will pull voters from one of the other 2 major parties and will do what's called split the vote. We can talk a little bit about that more in class to make sure you understand the importance and the impact of third parties. Oftentimes these third parties come from grassroots movements or grassroots parties. And this is where people, again, just like our functions of political parties, where parties exist to gather people of similar ideas into a movement, these grassroots parties will rise up to actually push a movement forward or push an agenda forward in government. For example, issues like immigration. And these grassroots movements and organizations become very important in our government and sometimes can even form political parties. So in the United States, what's an advantage of having a 2-party system? Well, it's kind of the middle of the road between a multi-party and obviously a one-party system, where you do have differences of opinions that are represented. So you oftentimes have the majority and minority groups represented, and it's not so diverse that you could face gridlock. In other words, gridlock meaning that the government really can't function because there's too many ideas represented. But of course, a disadvantage means that sometimes that does happen. I mean, you can look at our own federal government now and see how with the House being dominated by Democrats and the Senate and the presidency being dominated by Republicans, oftentimes that creates problems and conflict that actually make a working government difficult to form. There's also just usually 2 main groups represented in government, that there's really no gray area. You either have, the Democrats or Republicans, and so it's oftentimes very difficult for those third parties to actually get representation in government, which was the #1 function of political parties, to get their candidates elected to office. So I have an example that I made up myself with third party candidates to take a look at how third parties could influence an election. With Republicans, Libertarians, and Democrats running, oftentimes the Libertarians and Republicans are similar because they both believe in smaller federal government. So if you have these three candidates winning and the Libertarian is going to win 1,000 votes, and maybe from the Republican candidate, then that means that the Democrat has more. They have 16,005 votes. Well, if that Libertarian candidate had not have run, possibly those people who voted might have voted for the Republicans because they believe in small federal government. So that means that Republican candidate might have won that election had there not been a Libertarian running. So this kind of shows us the influence of a third party, where even though multiple ideas are going to be represented in candidates running for office, sometimes it can split a vote between two political parties that are very similar in some aspects, like the Republicans and Libertarians, and basically allow the other party, in this particular example, the Democrats, to win an election. So now we've come, unfortunately, to the end of our first screencast, and these are the notes that you should have been able to complete and fill out. And so if you'll bring them to class, there are a couple of things I'd like to do with them and use these to discuss political parties a little more in depth. And hopefully you'll bring your questions about political parties to class as well. I hope to see you soon in class. And so now I'll just leave you with this meme. I hope you like it. Think about it.